Every time I see that scene, I lose it. I cry. It's an amazing, amazing scene, and what you did in *To Five Bloods* is astonishing. But before we get to that, what Romeo Must Die is a Joel Silver production. Andrei Barkoviak, first time filmmaker. I had met him on the set of Terms of Endearment. He's a great cinematographer, and it was Jet Li's big breakout. What was fun about that movie for you, or challenging, or what?
I learned on that film, and it wasn't necessarily, I'm speaking about Romeo Must Die. Um, it wasn't necessarily the first time that I had experienced this, but what I learned from working on Romeo Must Die is that I should never for 1 second confuse what my experience has been making a particular piece of work. Never confuse what my experience has been with how the audience may respond, because people love that film. When it came out, people loved that film. And the making of the film had been somewhat challenging just because we'd had to do a lot of work on the script. And the work got done on this. Various writers came in and the work was completed on the script. We did the film. And when the film was released, there was an audience for this film. And granted, it could very well have been as a result of the fact that Aaliyah, who tragically left this world far too young, but Aaliyah was a hugely popular singer. I did
That's her
not
first
know.
role? Yeah.
I believe it was her second, maybe it
Mm.
was her first. Um, and Jit was also had a very sizable audience, and I didn't know who either one of them were before I started working on the film. But the process of getting the script in shape was challenging, but we did it. And when we did the work and the film was released, there was a sizable audience for this film. And so the lesson there was, whatever my experience is working on a film, once the work is complete and you release it to the audience, it's theirs now, and they're going to respond as they will. And so that
Okay.
was my remembrance. And can I
So
say one
you
thing before can I just say one thing before we talk about Bloods? You had asked me earlier in the conversation, was there ever a piece of makeup or a costume piece or that I had that was particularly memorable? And I should say that in addition to everything that I said, one of the very first films that I ever did, after it was actually the first time that I went away on location for a sizable amount of time. And it was a film called The Blood of Heroes, directed by my good friend uh, David Peoples. Dave is much more well known as David and Jan Peoples are much more well known as screenwriters, brilliant screenwriters. Dave Peoples directed this film. It was the first time I met Dave. And I had this idea, the character I was playing, his name was Mbulu. And I had this idea for scarification across my face. And I described it to Dave, and Dave said, sure, if you want to do that. And then described it to the prosthetics person who did it. I went and I they made a face mask for me, and then they built this scarification that I wore, which, and I didn't know this when I came up with this idea. It would take about, I don't know, 3.5 hours every morning So I would have to get to set like 3 hours before everybody else. I didn't know that, but this these prosthetic pieces that they added to my face and this stuff they would put in my hair. I had hair back then. Were very, very fundamental to my creation of this character Mbulu in the film Blood Heroes, directed by my good friend Dave Peoples. So
Cool.
you were about
Cool.
to
So
ask me
this
about the
brings
five
us
bloods.
to Paul. Yep, we're coming to Paul. It feels like everything you ever did before comes before this protean performance. Whether it's Othello or Harold Loomis, it's just such an extraordinary character. I almost think of Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. That kind of ex-soldier talking to us directly in the jungle. Talk about that one sequence where we showed a brief clip of it, where you're just literally looking at the camera talking. Roger referenced this. That must have been really tricky to do.
Uh, on some level, it was tricky, but Spike had given me fair warning that I would be speaking directly to the camera. So I knew that technically that was the demand of the work. He told me weeks in advance, this will be you just talking to the camera. Because I was given fair warning and I had a few weeks in order to prepare the work, I committed the words to memory because I did not want to be fumbling for the words when it was time to shoot that scene. So I had a lot of not months, but I had a few weeks to prepare myself to do that work. So anytime I was on set and I had a break in filming, maybe 2 weeks before we would have filmed the scene, I would go off and I would work on the monologue. So
Hmm.
by the morning that we did that scene, I was as ready as I could. I felt that I was as ready as I could be. I had prepared myself as fully as I was able to start to do that work. And I've said it countless times at this point, the only direction that Spike gave me was that I should um, uh, keep walking. The very first take that I did, I came through the underbrush there and I stopped and I looked around and then I started talking. And Spike said, no, 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 no. I need you to keep walking. When you come through, man, keep walking. That was the only direction that he gave me. And as we started to film, I became more and more comfortable and the monologue found its own rhythm between what I was saying and how I was moving. And I did end up stopping twice. But by that point, I had found a rhythm for the scene that apparently was working for Spike because he didn't tell me, he never came in and gave me any direction. We just did a number of takes of the monologue. And it was wonderful that he gave me that amount. I don't know how many takes we did, 8 or 9. I really don't remember. But the fact that we did multiple takes let me know that what I was doing was working for Spike as director. And I heard, and again, I've said this a few times, I heard him say at one point when we were setting up to do another take, and I heard him say, leave him alone, he's in the zone. Leave him alone, he's in the zone. And that was very affirming. And I
Well, that was a
just,
very challenging role, and you, we talked about this once before, but you were really um, putting all this. You were a Trump supporter, and you had PTSD, and you were tormented, and you were uh, trying to deal with your feelings about the character played by Chadwick Boseman, who had died. I mean, there was and scrambling with your friends. There was so much going on here. I am a huge, huge admirer of this movie. I actually feel very strongly about how good it is,
Thank
and I
you.
feel like
I
it
do
was
too.
robbed in some ways, as Roger does. You needed someone behind you. You needed to feel the support of Spike that he had your
And
back.
I did. And I did. I felt his support. I felt the foundation that he laid for all of us in the film. Um, uh, I felt affirmed. Um, and you're right. On some level, perhaps it's cumulative, going all the way back to 1992 when we first worked together. But this journey that we have been on together, or that I have been on with Spike, um, that culminates in this work at this time, I cannot say enough about how safe I felt. I felt safe enough to commit in that way. And I'm not saying if I hadn't felt safe, would I have still committed? Absolutely. But perhaps it wouldn't have been the same. Um, we had disagreements throughout the process of making the work, but the most important aspect of those disagreements for me was that we were able to get past it. And Spike, as my director, was able to apologize to me and simply say, "Hey, man, I was wrong. I said thus and such and thus and such. I was wrong." That was huge for me because it contributed to the level, the depth of safety that I felt. And in addition to the safety that I felt, there was that extraordinary bond that existed between myself and my colleagues, Clark Peters, Jonathan Majors, Norm Lewis, Isaiah Whitlock Jr., and Chadwick Boseman. And inside of the community of filmmakers, um, we had a special bond between the five of us that A, does not come along every day, and B, it was on some level foundational to how one was feeling doing the work and the extent on some level to which one could really commit to the work um, with a measure of safety
Even in the
and
jungle,
freedom
even in the
and
heat,
freedom.
I loved the idea that you were able to be, even at your age, because of this idea that Spike could send you guys back in time, playing your younger selves, and the audience totally goes along with it. It works really well.
Absolutely.
But you got to do all this action stuff, in running and gunning, and you were playing
That's right.
war. You were doing it.
And you know what? It was so heroic. Um, I will not say that I felt heroic for myself, but there were a couple of scenes in which I got to watch Clark and Isaiah and Norm do portions of the scenes, their portions of the scenes, and I got to watch, and they were extraordinarily heroic. And I got to appreciate that, absorb that, be a part of that. And I told them, there were two times in particular that I said, "Man, you all, that was extraordinary, y'all." One, because I got to watch them, I got to observe, but two, because we don't get to do that. Oftentimes on film, we don't get to do that. And here we were, four square, being given this opportunity by our director to exist in this world, in all of our humanity and all of our heroism, to express ourselves. It was extraordinary.
And you guys didn't know what Boseman was going through at that
We
time.
did not. We did not. And you know, in retrospect, it adds another layer of I don't know what. Um, to the extent that, excuse me, to the extent that it was an extraordinary experience, it adds yet another component to the specialness of the experience of making this work.
So you're an August Wilson man. What do you make of his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom?
Um, I thought it was terrific. I love that play. I remember seeing that play, and I am all for having his work committed to film. I thought they did a wonderful job, and I'm going to say that should Denzel Washington or whomever may be um,
They're doing
associated.
10 of them, right?
That's right. And I will say to you, Denzel, I want to play Bynum Walker in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. So
There
I
you
have no
go.
clue if that will ever get to Denzel's ears. When and if I speak with Denzel, I will tell him that directly. But I'm just putting it out there into the ether.